My dear brothers and sisters, at the outset, let me wish you all a very happy Easter. And I'm sure most of us would be attending this evening the Easter Vigil ceremony, at which the new fire will be blessed and the Easter candle would be lit from it and carried into the church, proclaiming Christ, light of the world. Later, we would be blessing the baptismal water, renewing our baptismal promises. And this baptismal water will be sprinkled on us to remind us of our baptism. In fact, we will be renewing our baptism itself. With this in background, I would like to reflect with you based on a book written by late Pope Benedict XVI. The book is entitled Seek That Which Is Above. The late Pope Benedict XVI in this book speaks about a Russian priest, Dmitry Dudko, who, sensing that he would shortly be arrested, issued a message to all Christians in which he says that he is speaking from Golgotha, which is not far away from the upper room, the place where the risen Lord appeared to the disciples behind the locked doors. He sees his place of living as Golgotha, where the Lord was crucified, but he sees it as the place where the risen Lord became present and showed himself in spite of locked doors, intended to keep everyone out, and in the bargain, it kept out our Lord himself. Further on, Pope Benedict XVI speaks about a Jewish philosopher, Theodor Adorno, who he says had a more profound view of things. In the passionate messianic yearning of his people, he continually asked how a just world or how justice in the world could be created. Ultimately, he arrived at this insight. If there is to be real justice in the world, it must be for all and for all time. And that means justice for the dead as well. It would have to be a justice that retroactively heals all past suffering. And this would imply the resurrection of the dead. Against this background, I think we can hear the message of Easter in a new way. Christ is risen. There is justice for the world. There is complete justice for all, which is able retroactively to make good all past sufferings. And this is because God exists and he has the power to do it. The question, however, arises, how can we respond and live up to these resurrection tidings? How can this message come into our midst and become a reality? For Easter is, as it were, the brilliance of open door that leads out the injustice of the world, as well as the challenge to follow this radiant light to show it to others, knowing that it is not a deluding dream, but the real light, the genuine way out. But how can we get there? The answer is given in the Easter Sunday reading, in which St. Paul writes to the Colossians, Christ is risen, seek the things that are above, where Christ is. Set your minds on the things that are above, not on things that are on earth. The quotation is from St. Paul's letter to the Colossians, chapter 3, verse 1 and following. The first message of the risen Lord communicated to those who were his by means of angels and the women is, come, follow me. I am going before you. The exact words from the gospel are, Tell my brothers, he has risen from the dead, and now he is going ahead of you to Galilee. That's where you will see him. Matthew 28, verse 7. Resurrection faith is a stepping forward along the way. It can be nothing else than a following in the steps of Christ, a discipleship of Christ. In his Easter Gospel, John has expressed very clearly where and how Christ has gone and whither we are to follow him. I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God. John 20, verse 17. He tells Mary Magdalene she cannot touch him now, but only when he has ascended. We cannot touch him in such a way as to bring him back into the world, but we can touch him by following him, by ascending with him. That is why Christian tradition deliberately speaks not simply of following Jesus, but following Christ. The late Pope Benedict XVI, towards the end of the meditation mentioned above, makes the following observation. He says, recently I was deeply disturbed to read in the words of a woman missionary that we are simply not in a position to follow Christ or show Christ to anyone, because most missionaries, totally taken up with the external activities, are by our standards not really able to pray. This inability means that they are in no way able to touch the point of the inner oneness of God and man. Thus, it is impossible for them to show the world the mystery of the incarnate one and to lead the world to the freedom that comes from that mystery. This often is the first challenge of Easter. We are summoned to begin the journey upward towards the hidden, true reality, and we must find that it is reality. We can find faith in the risen Lord only if we have encountered him, met him in our own lives. And we can encounter him only by following him. Only if both things are true of us can we bear witness to him and carry his light to the world. Pope Benedict XVI spoke about not really being able to pray. This means not able to be in touch with Christ. Neither we allow him to speak to us, nor do we. This will not allow us to understand Jesus, his mission and mentality. This is exactly what happened to the disciples. None of them understood the meaning of suffering. In fact, at one point of time, Jesus told Peter, when he resisted his suffering and death, he told Peter, "Get behind me, Satan." Terrible words. Then again, they could not be in prayer with him in Gethsemane. Having requested them to stay awake with him while he prayed, when he came back to them, he found them asleep. Jesus said to them, "So you had no strength to stay awake with me for 1 hour. Stay awake and pray, not to be put to the test. The spirit is willing enough, but the human flesh is weak." Perhaps this is the only request that Jesus ever made to his disciples, which they could not oblige him it was a personal request. They're distancing from Jesus because of their lack of their proper contact with Him, and that is in prayer. And this is seen powerfully during the last moments of Jesus' life. Judas sold Him for 30 pieces of silver. Peter denied Him thrice. John was walking along with Him, but at a distance away, so as not to get involved with the proceedings, and all the others ran away. This means they did not have an integrated contact with Jesus, which every prayer demands of all of us. Therefore, Jesus tells Mary Magdalene, "Tell my brothers, He has risen from the dead, and now He is going ahead of you to Galilee. That is where you will see Him." Pope Francis has a beautiful thought in this regard. He says he calls them to Galilee as they had failed to understand Him, and thus failed in the mission He had initiated in Galilee with the call of the apostles. So He calls them to begin anew from Galilee. And this happened in the context of their catching fish in the Sea of Galilee, and the profession of faith 3 times by St. Peter, wherein Jesus asked him thrice, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" With this new mission of the apostles, they began and they went all over the world to preach the good news of Jesus Christ, even sacrificing their lives. As I said at the beginning of this meditation, this is exactly what happens to us too every Easter. We make our yearly confession and make peace with God. At Easter Vigil, we renew our baptismal promises. Still, there are moments in our lives when we drift away from Christ, and the Church every year takes us back to that Galilee of our lives and asks us to make peace with God through the sacrament of reconciliation and the renewal of our baptismal promises, and thus begin anew. Let us therefore enter in this Easter era, Easter time, with this spirit and have a very meaningful Passover. Wish you all a very happy Easter.